Hello and welcome to the Gaming with Science podcast, where we talk about the science behind some of your favorite games.
Today, we're going to discuss Atiwa by Lookout Games. All right, hello, welcome back to Gaming with Science. This is Brian.
This is Jason.
And this is Marielle, and I'm a researcher at Linnaeus University in southeast Sweden, and I mostly work on computational movement ecology, and especially looking into the role of animal movement for the spread of pathogens. And sometimes I also look into the dispersion of seeds by animals, and this is what is relevant for the game today.
Very much, and we're extremely excited to have Marielle van Toor here. This is a unique example of a science game for us. This game was explicitly inspired by a study that was published by Marielle and Dinah Deckman it wasn't even that long ago. When was the study published?
2019.
In 2019. So that's relatively recent in Current Biology, which is a very bright and shiny journal. So very excited to be able to make this arrangement here to talk about Atiwa and sort of environmental activism, scientific environmental activism, and ecological services, and bats, and Ghana. Okay, but before we get into that, we usually start with some kind of a science banter, science fact. Jason, you are up this time. Marielle, I think you said you might have something as well. So usually we give the guest host first dibs. So do you want to share something with us?
So I have one thing that I think is really cool, and that is in some way related to the game, even though it's on a completely different system, but also located in Africa. So there's a researcher whose name is Claire Spottiswoode. She works in South Africa, and she's been working on a system of mutualism, and that means interactions that are mutual or beneficial to both partners between humans and birds. And this is particularly the greater honeyguide, which is a species that kind of indicates to honey badgers, but also humans in this case, where to find bee nests as a resource for honey, and for the honeyguides also as a resource for the beeswax. And she's been working on this for a great long time. And I once saw a couple of years ago a plenary talk by her, having never heard about her work, and it was absolutely amazing because this greater honeyguide, the Latin name for that is indicator, which I think is really fun.
I love I can't remember the term for when the genus and species are the same name. It's my very favorite.
I also don't remember.
Yeah, I'll look it up. I did know that taxonomically you cannot do that for plants. It is.
Just animals. And I don't know about mushrooms.
I don't know about mushrooms either. I might look that up.
But anyway, so she studies these in multiple different locations with different tribes of African peoples. And there is basically a way to make the interaction between humans and these honeyguides more likely. And that is because these people have developed basically calls and whistles that attract the species. It's like, this is something that it's similar as to what you would do with your dog. You call it by its name.
Okay.
But here is basically a specific type of whistle, and the birds locally to that group of people would respond to that one more likely than to any other kind of like human sound. That's
fascinating. Are honeyguides corvids? Because this sounds like a crow thing.
Oh, now you're asking me things I do not know.
I also, I've heard about honeyguides before, but I've usually heard them in the context of, don't they have a symbiotic relationship with honey badgers?
Yes.
Oh,
so
okay.
this is the same kind of behavior, only that they don't do it with honey badgers, but also with people.
Huh.
So I just looked it up. It looks like they're actually in the woodpecker family, or sister to the woodpecker family.
Yes.
Okay, weird. If they were crows or corvids, I'd be like, oh, well, of course. But to see this like pop up at a completely different group is actually very cool.
Yeah. So anyway, she gave this talk and it was completely mind-blowing. So if you want, I can put in a link for one of her studies that was published in, I think, Nature. So that would also give like a nice introduction to what is happening there.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be excited to put that into the show notes for sure. Is this like sort of almost like a form of like pre-domestication?
Maybe. It's a couple of years ago, so I don't really remember much, but I thought it's not something that we hear of usually, so this is quite unique, I think. Yeah, if you don't consider, of course, kind of like interactions with domestic animals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I want to know this sounds like humans are co-opting what the birds already do with the badgers. And I want to know how that came about. Like, obviously there's a mutualism. I assume the badger gets the food and the honey guide gets, you said, the wax out of it. But how did the birds and the badgers learn to communicate with each other?
Well, the question is it specific? Did it specifically evolve between honeyguides and badgers, or is this a more kind of like opportunistic behavior from the birds? Like in terms of like observing that there are species that prey on honey, kind of like bee colonies and then kind of use that information. It might not be specific to honey badgers from the start, but I wouldn't know.
What do they use the wax for? I assume it's building their nest?
Let me just briefly check because I don't actually know.
I guess the other thing is thinking about, like, is this a learned behavior? Is this something they have to be taught? Is this something that every honey badger and honey guide sort of have to develop this relationship? Does the mama honey badger have to indicate to the juveniles, like, hey, you should pay attention to these birds?
Well, Wikipedia, so take this
the ultimate source of all scientific information.
But Wikipedia says that they feed on wax.
Okay.
But also all the little critters that live in there, like pupae and bees.
Okay, so this is like when you eat your little baby bell cheese and then you just bite through the wax, I guess. All right, thank you. That's extremely cool. And again, I think it's fun to think about how these relationships sort of like pop up at this point. Jason, what did you have?
I'm starting to follow your lead and try to find things that are on point with what we're talking about. So I started to find what was cool about bats recently. And I found one from a few months back where some researchers fitted very, very tiny little microphones to bats in order to figure out their echolocation. Because there's a question of how on earth do bats echolocate when they're leaving caves, when there are literally thousands of bats all chirping at the same time, trying to get their way out. And they use that echolocation to find their way out and not crash into each other, into walls. But how do they do that when there's literally thousands of them all doing the same thing and those echoes are bouncing all around everywhere? So what they did is they made these teeny tiny little microphones, like 4-gram microphones, because the bat is only 40 grams. So they didn't want to add a huge amount of weight to the poor bat. And they found that, yes, there is a huge cacophony, like up to like 80-90% of the echolocation could be masked at the time of leaving the cave because there's just so much noise around. But the bats that were closest to the one bat going, especially the one in front, were also still the clearest. And especially the one in front, it's echolocating straight ahead, so it doesn't interfere. So the ones you're most likely to collide with are also the least likely to get interfered with. And then as soon as they get out of the cave entrance, they spread out really fast. And so that they reduce those odds. Apparently, it doesn't reduce the odds to zero. Like there are occasional midair bat collisions, but the way they work and the way they do their echolocation, it seems to minimize those number of collisions. And they didn't mention this, but I imagine they still don't spread out super far, because I remember that when the bats are leaving, it's a great time for them to be predated on by like birds of prey and such. And so they still want to group together for safety, but they also want to spread apart so they don't crash into each other. So maybe there may be some conflicting forces here.
Just out of curiosity, Jason, did they mention any kind of real life application? This seems like, and we can use this to better inform air traffic control or something like that.
My suspicion would be, some sort of like drone control or something, because
that
I imagine
sense.
I didn't read that explicitly, but I'm guessing that it's that. It's if you're trying to control a whole bunch of stuff using autonomous vehicles or something where there's a bunch of noise in the system, how can you optimize that system so as to minimize the number of conflicts that happen? And so this would be for like drones or autonomous vehicles or something, is my suspicion. Like, again, I don't remember reading that in the article itself.
It's also interesting how it's not entirely dissimilar from how that works if you use visual cues instead. Because I think that is relatively similar in fish and bird swarms, that you kind of like weight the input from the ones that are closest to you most.
Do we call it a murmuration of bats the same way we do for birds, or not?
But the collective noun?
No, like with like the murmuration behavior where like a bird is only ever tracking like the 3 birds around it. And that's where you get all the weird like wave behaviors as you see big flocks. I guess bats aren't really notorious for flocking, I suppose.
No.
So maybe not. I have a bonus fact now because Jason's thing reminded me of something else. Now, first of all, again, I know fruit bats don't echolocate, which we're going to talk about that later, but this is
with one exception.
Oh, there's one exception?
Yes.
What's the exception?
There's a couple of species in the genus Rosetus who have a different form of echolocation that I think has evolved independently. Egyptian Rosetus is a species that is most known for it, but I think there's a couple of other species in that genus that also do that.
Well, then, hey, that actually ties into everything else, because I was going to talk about another example of convergent echolocation evolution. The auditory genes in bats and whales have converged. The genes that control their hearing, they have the same type of mutation. Which is
cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? Because obviously that had to be hit on separately from similar mammalian starting material.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's just my little bonus fact. We'll put that in the thing too. But okay, all right. Who wants to talk about a board game? So today we're going to be talking about Atiwa. Atiwa. There is a pronunciation guide for how it would be said. It's like Adiwa, which is based on the Adiwa range of a rainforest. So this game was created by Uwe Rosenberg, who is a prolific and celebrated board game designer from Germany. Looking on his Wikipedia page, it has six games on Board Game Geek in the top 100 with sort of a consistent mechanic. He is the co-founder of Lookout Games, which published Atiwa.
What are some of his other big hits?
Oh, Agricola would be the one that would be probably his oldest and probably most renowned. Feast of Odin. There's a two-player game called Patchwork that I own and have never played. But yes, there's several games. I think in terms of the ones that are on the top 100, Patchwork, Agricola, Feast of Odin. I don't think Atiwa broke into the top 100, unfortunately. But he puts out a game like every couple of years. Like he is prolific. So the game itself is for 1 to 4 players. Got to have that solo player mode now. Does play fast, only about 30 minutes to play when you set it up, which always when you look at a game that looks this complicated, that seems like it's impossible, but it's really not. Like we'll talk about this later. 12 and up seems about right to me. I mean, Jason's daughters, yes, absolutely 12 and up, but maybe not every 12-year-old is going to necessarily, but I mean, your mileage may vary. So the game, what does it look like? This is a worker placement game, which is a very common sort of designer board game where you'll have all these little action spots that you can put on the board that will let you do different key things. Both of the players have 3 sets of little workers that they can go out and to assign to collect various resources. There's one sort of central board in the middle. It's got a very distinct sort of like top-down aerial illustration styles. Actually, conveniently, maybe about drone height or maybe bat height would be the better way to think about it. Sort of looking down at the landscape. So it's sort of a village in Ghana. There's trees. There's depictions of tiny little goats, tiny little wild animals, which I wasn't really clear what those were at first, but actually from looking into it a little bit more, hold on. I took a note on the type of animal that this was. A dukir. It is a small antelope, I believe. One of the only animals other than the bats that is specifically mentioned by name somewhere in the game. And the board has a lot of different action points on it. Other than that, you have cards that represent either terrain, so that may be like a cave, a marshland, an orchard, or a location. And these are where your villagers are going to live. And those go from farmstead as the smallest up to a town with the most based on how many houses they can accommodate. In front of each player, you'll have a little board where you put your entire little stack of different little wooden meeples. And those represent goats and wild animals and trees and fruit.
And people.
Yes, and people, families specifically. And your goal in the game is to assemble like upwards of 8 of these little tiles representing either the terrain or the locations and sort of build a little tableau where your people will live, where they will collect resources. And one of the important Uwe Rosenberg mechanics that he uses in most of his games is that you have to feed your people. At the end of the turn, you have to have enough resources to make sure that your people are fed. So the conceit of the game is based on bats' ability to reforest is like one of the main mechanics in the game. So as you're playing, your people need to have a couple of things. They need to have food and they need to have gold. They need to have some kind of economy. And they'll use that to plus wood, build their houses. There's several different things that they can eat. If you have goats, they'll provide some food just as milk, or you can slaughter the goat and get extra food. You can hunt for wild animals. You can collect fruit, or you can eat bats. And if you don't have that, you can also pay for food. So the main mechanic in the game is these families. You have, they call them trained and untrained families. So when you start, your family is untrained. Evidently, they have not been informed about the ecological benefits of bats. So those families have a couple different things that distinguish them. They, at the end of each turn, they go out and they will mine for gold. And that is associated with pollution. You will actually block out spaces on your tiles, the pollution associated with collecting gold, with artisanal gold mining.
And important part here is that you're not guaranteed to find the gold. You draw it out of the bag. You might get 1, you might get 0, you might get very, very lucky and get 2, but that almost never happens. Mm-hmm. So it's like you're guaranteed to pollute your land, but you're not guaranteed to actually earn anything.
That's true. So the untrained families will mine. The untrained families also will have the ability to eat bats. They will provide 1 food as bushmeat, presumably. A trained family on the end that's familiar with the advantages of bats, they don't have to go mining. They just receive gold. I don't know what that represents. I suppose that's supposed to represent the additional economic benefit of working with the bats.
Yeah, I was actually explaining this to my family last night. I was just saying we're gonna be recording this today, and it's like, yeah, and then you train the family, and then like they can have a bat live with them, and then they just earn money because of that. And so
Hmm.
my 18-year-old daughter says, well, it sounds like people are just paying them to like bats. And like,
Maybe.
well, yes. And then I thought about it, I was like, yeah, but actually it's more like the bats are paying them rent. So if we wanted to completely break the metaphor of the game, what happens is the bats are now the ones mining gold, and they're just better at it than the humans, and they're paying the humans rent. In reality, yes, it is probably like, oh, this is the benefits of agroforestry
Mhm.
or something like that. But it is funny if you sort of like twist the metaphor of the game a bit.
A little bit, yeah.
And maybe it's kind of going in the direction, it's like these bats obviously don't only disperse seeds of fruit trees, but also of seeds that are otherwise economically important.
Hmm.
I think this is like the most important seed disperser for African teak, which is quite valuable as lumber.
Hmm. The other thing that a trained family can do, and Jason already alluded to this, is that they can allow a bat to live, I guess, in their house or at least on their property. I don't know if the idea is the bat's actually living in the hut itself, but just close by. And they can't eat the bats anymore. But the gold to bat trade-off seems like it completely like covers for that. To get your little houses, to expand your village, you need to pay for gold and trees. So you have to cut down trees that are on your tableau to do it. And that's where the bats really come into play, because the bats are able to eat fruit and cause trees to just spread and sprout. And actually, you can get a pretty efficient bat to tree engine going at a certain point and just have a ton of trees growing every turn, basically.
Free food.
Yep, free food, free wood, free everything. Let's see. I think the game is based on victory points. You get victory points for how much gold you have. You get victory points for, how many things you have on your tableau in terms of trees and wild animals and goats, and particularly people. You get points for the cards that you've put into your tableau, your locations and your villages and stuff. Some of the terrain cards actually give you negative points. Some of the terrain cards are like, hey, here's like a free house. So actually that's very powerful. So you're actually going to lose some points for doing that. One of my very favorite terrain cards is this very goofy card that Jason knows what I'm going to talk about. This is the Haunted House card.
Oh, yeah.
So it is an empty house. It is depicted in the night form, and it has a spot to put bats all around it.
Yeah, the thing is, it's actually not empty. It's just a dilapidated, broken down house, and it does show a family inside.
And yeah, I think that is the basics of the game. Is there anything that you feel like I missed, Jason?
My impression playing this game is it feels like a very complex game because when we were playing, any given turn, there were like 20 different options I had for where to put my meeple to try to get something done. And so I kind of had to take the approach of, instead of like, of all these options, which is the optimal to do, it was more like, okay, here's my goal. Which of these options will get me closer to that goal? They would change a little bit. Which of those actions are available shifts a little bit over time. It's not a huge amount, but it does change a bit to make each game a little bit unique. And we talked about how you were trying to figure out, is it possible to like win the game just through the gold mining method? And I think the answer to that is no.
Absolutely no. I don't think you can.
You're destroying your board to be able to put stuff there, which is what gets you most points, and you're not guaranteed to get the gold back. You train a family, you're guaranteed to get the gold. It's just better. So they're not subtle in the messaging of the game.
No.
Is that having the bats around and living in harmony with the bats is just paying better for trying to win the game.
It sort of takes that idea of board game metaphor and like what you take away from it. It's like, okay, don't do this. This is bad. You literally cannot win this way. One of these days, I am just going to have to try being the like Captain Planet, the bad guy, the villain who would just, no, I don't like bats and I refuse to work with them. We'll just see how bad it actually goes.
Eat all the bats and mine all the gold. And
Yep. Eat all the bats, mine all the gold, cut down all the trees.
Hunt down all the wildlife.
Yep. Just goats, nothing but goats.
it was a little bit of dissonance in that we worked out that mathematically at the end of your last turn, you still have to feed everyone and stuff. And so that's the point at which the wild animals aren't worth very many victory points. And so at that last turn, the most optimal way of feeding all your families is just to slaughter all the wildlife.
Yeah, you just drive all the wild animals extinct. It's fine. They'll come back.
That's a little bit of dissonance, but it's only in the last turn.
To be honest, that last turn change in strategy is also really common for a lot of these games. There's usually things that you would do in the last turn that would make no sense any other time. I imagine that for an optimizer like you, Jason, this game probably did seem really complicated. I gotta be honest, I was dreading this game just a little bit. I was concerned that as a very Euro worker placement game by the pinnacle of Euro worker placement game designers, Uwe Rosenberg, that this was going to favor strategic complexity over fun, that this was going to be like the game for the board game geek extremist.
Yeah, so in Magic terminology, you have the spike archetype, the person who's there to master the rules and to win through understanding the game better than their opponents.
This is like how the world record Scrabble people aren't necessarily people who speak English. They just have memorized the dictionary. Were you aware of that?
I was not aware of that.
Yeah, some of the anyway, that is a complete and utter tangent, so we don't need to go down that route. But Marielle, have you had a chance to play Atiwa before?
A couple of times, yes, but it's a bit of time ago.
Okay.
I have to say, I'm not that particularly strategic about these games. I just do what I think is fun.
Yep, me too.
And then I'll see what happens in the end. Which means that in another one of Uwe Rosenberg's games, Caverna, I tend to lose, and it's always the same person who wins in our little board game group.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that I never do. But here I've one time managed to win.
It sounds like you may have a similar board game dynamic to Jason and I, where I am the less strategic player. I play for fun.
Yeah, fun is good.
Are you a board game nerd, Marielle? I forgot to ask.
Not a nerd. I think that's more my friends.
Okay.
I'll go along happily, though.
All right.
You did say before we started recording, you were a podcaster, though, right? You were a podcaster.
A long time ago. It's quite some time ago. But I did that during my PhD with a friend of mine, Science News Podcast.
What was the title? Is it still like around?
No, it's like it's no longer active. I think you can still find the episodes on YouTube or so. It's in German, though. The name of the podcast was, and you can pronounce it two different ways, Conscience or Conscience, because we were both located in Constance in southern Germany.
Oh, well, that's a cool triple pun. I like that a lot. All right. So, let's try to talk about the science here. We're in this absolutely unique circumstance of having a game having the researcher who inspired the game here to talk about the science. One of the researchers.
Exactly. And here we need to basically do a little disclaimer because the study system is mostly that of Dina Dechman, who is at the Max Planck Institute for Nowadays Animal Behavior. And she's a former colleague of mine. So I did my PhD there. And she has been working with the study system for at least since 2009, I think. And I joined for this one study because our interests kind of combined. And we said, it's like, it would be cool to kind of like do this in this other way. And that is where my expertise came in. Yeah, but she's been working with this particular bat species in that particular area for a very long time, together with others, of course.
You're still colleagues, right? You were at Max Planck. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I understand. It's like, I don't think she died.
No.
That would explain why she didn't respond to emails, though. No offense if you're listening, Dinah.
Yeah, is she going to listen to this? Should we give her a hard time for not coming on?
Oh, no, I don't think we should.
Okay. I know schedules.
She's probably very, very busy conducting research out there in the real world to help people.
The fact that anybody can make time to actually to have professors' schedules coordinate for things like this always seems like a small miracle. So, no shade. If she, I am sure she would have come if she was able. But yes, Dina Dechman and yourself, you guys were colleagues on this, and she has done a lot of work on the bats. But let's actually, so some of the things that we had here was so how accurate do you think the science is as depicted in Atiwa?
So maybe we should say a little bit about what the study was about.
Yes, please.
Initially, because otherwise,
of course, that would make perfect sense.
It's harder to understand. So this is mostly based on a study about a species of fruit bat that is called straw-colored fruit bats. And as far as I'm aware, it's the most common kind of like individual numerous species of mammals in Africa,
wow,
in the African continent. And what they do, what is really special, is so they hang out during the day in trees, or roosts, in colony sizes up to 1 million. So it's a huge amount of fruit bats making a lot of noise, probably. And what they do is they commute at night. So when dusk falls, they fly out from their roost, seemingly independently in different directions. And then they go in search of flowering or fruiting trees. And then they will, if it's a flowering tree, they will basically just try to slurp up the nectar, maybe eat some pollen. And if it's a fruiting tree, they will go there, they will pick a fruit, fly to a feeding roost, like a different tree that's a little bit away, which is more safe, because obviously if you have a fruiting tree that's like attracting a lot of animals, you will also have predators. And then they will eat this fruit. If it's one that has a large seed, they will kind of like squeeze out the fruit juice and just drink that and then drop the seed where they eat. And if it's small seeds, they might ingest them. And then that is when these long distances that they cover during a single night. So these food trees can be up to 88, 90 kilometers away from where they sleep during the daytime.
Oh, wow.
That is when this kind of like having seeds in their gut and transporting them over very long distances is ecologically very important because they will just poop out the seeds wherever they go.
So you're used to hearing about birds having this kind of behavior.
Yes. And here the thought is, why are bats particularly good at this? Because they eat, the seeds that they actually eat are usually small ones, and small seeds are common in pioneering and trees that are able to kind of colonize open areas. And what bats do different from a lot of forest bird species is actually cross open areas.
Oh, okay.
Which a lot of birds don't really like doing, especially if they're forest specialists.
Okay.
Whereas these bats don't care because they fly at night.
And you said earlier, these bats don't echolocate.
No.
Presumably because they're not they can navigate well by sight, and they probably seek out their food more by smell. Is that right? I assume they have really good senses of smell?
Might be, yeah. And I mean, obviously they're mostly, it gets underway while it's still dusky. So there's like twilight around. And how you can always tell a species of bat that is echolocating from one that is using sight. The ones with sight have really, really big eyes. The ones that don't echolocate. And Eidolon, the straw-colored fruit bat, has huge eyes.
They're very cute.
They are. I mean, watch them eat a banana. It's fantastic.
We'll
have
find
to
a
link
video
of that.
Yeah, we will absolutely put a video of that into the show notes.
So in the study that we did was basically, we had tracks, GPS tracks from these bats. And what I did was basically train a movement model based on that and do a bunch of simulations to kind of look at, given their behavior that they do, and given on the colony sizes that we are aware of during different times of year, what would we expect to see in terms of seed dispersal for an entire colony instead of just a single individual? Kind of like a spatially explicit prediction of what we think might happen.
Okay, what was your take home from that?
That they probably, like most of the seeds will probably disperse to relatively close to the roosting site because they have very long gut retention times. And gut retention time means how long does the seed stay inside the body of the bat? How long does it take before it exits the bat again? I mean, we did the simulation basically for a single night based on the assumption that all that these bats are eating during this night is like small seeded fruit, huge amounts. I mean, amazing amounts of poop spread over the environment.
Hey, bat guano has been a resource for centuries, so...
Yeah. So actually the seeds get deposited with their own little heap of fertilizer.
It's a good relationship.
More relevant for elephant dung, I guess, with seeds, but less competition because less seeds in a single droplet.
So I did want to ask, so the game, when it depicts this, it's just fruit. It's incredibly generic. And basically every tree has sort of this, like, I'm not sure, it's just a generic orange colored fruit.
It looks like a pumpkin to me, but it's probably meant to be more like a peach or apricot or some other like soft fruit like that.
No, it's a very specific fruit. Now,
is it shea? Is it shea fruit?
Oh, help.
Okay.
I used to know this. I don't remember.
Because this is something I was not able, like I was trying to figure out, you know, I found the Dukier antelope and everything. And then the only other species that's specifically mentioned by name in the game, other than Eidolon, other than the straw-colored fruit bat itself, is the baobab tree. But I'm trying to figure out what this fruit is. It looks a little bit like a shea tree fruit, but I don't think people eat that.
The species is Uapaca kirkiana. I can also look up the English name.
Hold on.
So it's called sugar plum in German. Sugar plum.
So I'm assuming based on the name like that must be good.
Or ridiculously sweet. And nothing else. I don't know. But it would be obviously a good energy source for bats if it's very dense in sugars.
Okay. So the particular fruit that's depicted in the game is probably supposed to... Oh, it is. It is. Look at that. That has a lot of different colors. That's neat. Okay. Well, we're going to have to link to that too. Thank you for sharing that because I could not figure it out. So I was trying to look up native fruit trees in Ghana, and there were a lot of ones that were mentioned as economically important, but this one wasn't on the list. So thank you.
Yeah. The thing is, I probably know which photo this kind of illustration is kind of inspired by.
Oh, yeah? Like the original illustration of the bat eating the fruit?
There is a photograph of that. That's also in the press release that was mentioned in the little information booklet that comes with the game. And the photo has been taken by Christian Ziegler, who is like a very well-known nature photographer who works a lot with scientists at the Max Planck Institute.
This is such a unique experience of having this game that is tied so explicitly to this study. It's very, very fun. Okay, so one of the other things I wanted to ask based on this conversation about the idea of the large seeded fruit versus the small seeded fruit is it does make me curious if there's any evidence of coevolution or a symbiotic relationship between specific fruit trees and between the bats, because it seems like there's sort of a natural compatibility here.
I I don't know whether that would be the case in any for kind of like seed dispersal as such. What you do see is kind of co-evolution between particular bat species and tree species that require bats for pollination. So flowers are often much more morphologically kind of like adapted to their pollinators as opposed to fruit, because fruit that will be tasted to nearly everyone.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm not aware of any like specific species-specific mutualisms with straw-colored fruit bats, but I think there's a couple of examples for it in Northern America in terms of pollinating bats.
Okay, so coevolution from a pollination perspective, but not necessarily for explicitly seed dispersal.
Not that I'm aware of, at least.
Okay. All right. So how do you, like, again, the whole point of the game is bats eat fruit, grow trees. Like that, if that conceit seems like that is at the core of how this is working. Obviously, all games are a metaphor. It's not a perfect representation. You're not going to grow a tree. And, well, it's always a little unclear how much time is passing when we're dealing with these things. Jason, do you want to, like, how would we approximate the amount of time that is passing?
Well, so at the end of every turn, you have your reproduction phase, which is where if you have enough of a certain type of meeple on there, the families, the goats, the wild animals, they make more of themselves. So I think a year is probably a good one. The people, I assume, are less like this is families growing in, and more like, hey, a new family has moved into the neighborhood, into the village from somewhere else. But if we're assuming like the wild animals and the goats, they can probably about a year.
Okay. So, but a tree is not going to grow in a year.
No, not exactly.
Again, it's an abstraction.
Yeah, but I don't know any game, video game or board game. Well, I guess with the notable exception of photosynthesis, where growing the tree is the entire mechanic of the game, where the trees aren't growing way too fast, right? That's just nobody wants to wait for trees to grow as long as they actually take to grow, right?
That would be a very long board game session. Let's play 35 rounds of this before we can make the first harvest.
Maybe that's going a little bit too far down the simulation route, I suppose. Again, one of the things I wanted to mention is, and I love it whenever a game does this, because again, it's very helpful to me, is that there's an accompanying booklet that comes with the game, sort of explaining the history of Ghana, the study from a lay perspective, how it is represented in the game, gold mining, all of this stuff. It's like, oh, okay, well, here's my designer notes. Also, in the rule booklet, there is a little tiny caricature of Uwe Rosenberg sort of explaining the implementation of different aspects in the game, which I think when you get to the point where you're putting a caricature of your own head into the game, that must mean that you're a celebrated and recognized board game designer, I suppose.
Also, some level of probably kind of personal engagement with this that goes beyond just like, oh, I had this idea for a game.
That's true.
But like personal interest in the entire system, probably.
Yeah.
Because I think, as far as I've heard, he wanted to write a book about this as well.
He did. Although it was supposed to be, yes, there was supposed to be like a full companion nonfiction book. I don't speak German. Weckruf aus Ghana?
Weckruf, yeah, it's like wake up call.
But as far as I can tell, unfortunately, it looks like that was never published. There's an ISBN number that doesn't go anywhere. It seems like maybe Atiwa didn't sell as many copies as they wanted to kind of justify it. But, the game is out there, and I have to imagine that the game has attracted attention, and that's not a bad thing. Again, this idea of games as educational tools, or particularly, this is really specifically an outreach tool, isn't something I've really seen very much. So
no, this is definitely the best. Like, this study has had the best outreach I've ever seen. So like, let's all make board games about studies, because then people will actually be interested in it.
Well, let's all make good board games about studies.
Let's all make good board games.
We have talked about the issue where educational board games are almost a dirty word, because most of the scientists making the games are not game designers. They don't know how to make the game fun. I think it really helps here that you had a literally world-class game designer translate the science into something that is an actually very fun, strategically complex worker placement game that still manages to convey the point of the science.
Yes, but also creating somewhat of a what-if scenario. Because obviously, I mean, part of the motivation for working with bats can also be they get a lot of bad representation elsewhere. It's like they have not always the best names, and they're not only, from a scientific standpoint, straw-colored fruit bats are not only interesting in terms of ecosystem services, but also, of course, zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic being diseases that can spread from animals to humans.
Yeah, I believe bats are like one of the huge reservoirs of coronaviruses in the world, aka where COVID probably came from, if you step it back a few mutations.
So doing something to kind of show is like these are not only negative, but there can also be like a positive association, and to a degree that we're probably not fully aware of. That is kind of like the study. And then what he did was basically is like, what if people actually were actually aware of this in that particular region? How could you develop a system where you have cooperation instead of eating them just for bushmeat? Because that is what happens.
That was a question we had. Is there any sort of outreach extension programs in place to do what happens in the game, to educate families and say, hey, this is actually helping you out in the long run. So let's try to get this harmony going. Do those programs actually exist?
This is something that would obviously be better answered by Dina, because she is aware of that more, and also involved in some of kind of like monitoring projects and so on. So they have like an Africa-wide Eidolon monitoring program that they're running, where they do also educate people, I think. But that is then really people who are kind of like local and interested in that to begin with. I'm not aware of any larger scaled education in that regard.
So that really is the what if scenario. It's like, what if we did do this? It's not representing something that's actually happening. It's more of like, we really should be doing this. Is that the idea of like ecosystem service, this idea of the sort of like unseen economic benefits that come from a healthy ecosystem? It's very hard to communicate because it's like you can't see it, or you just assume it, versus that tangible benefit of money in hand. Right. It's tricky. And I know this is one example of that, of the benefits of bats for reforestation. I think wetlands, we talk about that for their ecosystem services, for what they do for the water system, for cleaning up water. And the ways to calculate it is, if you didn't have that, how much would it cost to do that yourself? How much would it cost for humans to replicate that? And usually it's not practical. It's like, you shouldn't be doing it, right? You can't do it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's also really kind of like hard to understand what is actually going on, and like how much of a deal is it? Like, what are the what is kind of the rat tail of all of this? Because we assume that there is a huge impact of huge bat colonies on seed dispersal and probably also nutrient spread, but we don't know. And the only way to really test that out is to kind of take away all the bats.
Oh, no.
That is maybe something that we shouldn't test at all.
Not a good thing for a controlled experiment, I don't think.
No.
But I guess that's why studies like this are so important, right? Is to try to get a clearer understanding about what the benefits actually are.
Yeah.
I was going to say there are examples where we do get this right. So my understanding is, and I can double check this, put in the show notes, is that part of the reason why a large part of upstate New York here in the States is state park or wilderness or stuff is to essentially maintain the drinking water quality for New York City. It's like the Hudson drains like half the state. And apparently a long time ago, they recognized that we need to protect this so that New York City actually has quality drinking water. And so that's why the development up there has been much less. And I'll double check that and put in the link in the show notes for the sources for that.
I guess I'm also curious, what was the context of this game happening? You were approached about this for permission, or what was that? How did that happen?
How do we get Uwe Rosenberg to make a game out of our research? That's what he's asking.
Not really,
Okay.
but sure.
No, actually, I had nothing to do with that at all. It's like at the time that the game was nearly finished and they were looking for some additional information for their little info booklet that they kind of put in with the game. They told us, it's like, oh yeah, so Uwe Rosenberg made this game. Would you like us to include any more additional information? And you're like, is this spam or not? And the only reason why I kind of like looked at it to begin with was because Lookout Games and the name Uwe Rosenberg rang a bell. So as I said, I'm not a board game nerd, so I didn't immediately recognize the name, but it was like, sounds familiar. And that's why I looked at it. I was like, oh, I think this is a big deal. I had to ask my nerd friends first.
Man, he really must have got inspired by your study. It's got to feel really good. It's just like he read a press release related to the study, and it was like, this is the seed of a thing that I'm going to spend the next year of my life working on.
Somehow, yes. I don't know how that happened. And maybe it was just this. I think in the booklet he mentioned specifically some reference to a local king.
Yeah.
Who does exist and who is quite fond of these bats and lets them kind of like roost in his private gardens. And that is kind of like an example for the local community maybe. But the problem is I've never actually been there. So as I said, it's Dina's study system and I was just a local computer nerd to do some calculations.
Jason is also my local computer nerd. Although I guess you spend more time in the field than I do. I'm really the laboratory, so I shouldn't like point any shade in your direction.
Yeah, although I say like it's definitely people ask me for gardening tips because they hear I work on corn. It's like wrong skill set. Like you want a genome analyzed, I'm good, but it's kind of a miracle my corn survives to the end of the season.
Yeah. Also, don't dare put me in a lab. Don't.
Are you are not a wet lab person?
No, it's like I did some lab work during my education, but I no.
Okay.
I'm not very good at that.
That's totally fair. My lab smells very bad. That's my usual thing I like to point out to people. But anyway, let's see. What else? Is there anything else that we should talk about that we haven't yet related to the science?
Well, I'm curious. Let's broaden this a little bit.
Yeah.
So we've focused a lot on this particular study system with these particular fruit bats. How widespread are fruit bats? Most of the bats I think about are the echolocating bats, which presumably are not fruit bats, but are there fruit bats on every continent? Like how many species are there? Like
Except for Antarctica. There's no Antarctic.
well, yes,
Yeah.
there's no fruit bats in Antarctica because there's no fruit. So
I don't think there's any
just gonna
bats in
ignore,
Antarctica.
like
Those
yeah, we
Antarctic
can just
bats.
ignore Antarctica. Like the penguins can have it. We'll just ignore it for the purposes of every continent statements.
Oh, and now you're asking the non-bat experts. So I think this last time I heard there was more than 1,400 species of bats, most of which are what you call the microbats, Microcoropterida, which is the echolocating ones.
Mhm.
But some of those are also fruit eating. Kind of like you have these two big branches. One is megabats, the other one is microbats, which tells you something about the size.
So we need some nanobats. We'll have to work on
Well,
that.
there's some that are really, really tiny. And I think, this might be completely wrong, that there's around 250 species or so of the larger ones.
Aren't most mammals bats?
No, rodents, I think, are more species rich. Okay, according to this reference, 197 species of megabats.
We just need 3 more to get the even 200.
Yeah, that's probably going to happen because there's a lot of, especially in the microbats, there's a lot of cryptic speciation where you have species that look the same, but they're not actually the same species.
Yeah, genetic data will probably start separating that out some.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jason, that's your job. You could be the genome guy, right? Get us those extra 3 species of bats.
I mean, the one that I mentioned, Rosettas, the echolocating megabats, seems there's like a bunch of subspecies with very distinct distribution areas. Maybe there's something more to that. And then you would get above your 200.
I got to say, that genus name is fantastic. Eidolon? What a fantastic, I'm used to only hearing that in fantasy settings, but that's a good one.
So when you say mega bat, big bat, like how big of a bat are we talking about? Is it like cat-sized with wings or?
They're much more lightweight. So Eidolon is not the largest, but also not the smallest. And they, I think, weigh up to 350 grams. But the wingspan is like 75 centimeters.
Oh, wow.
Quite large. There's larger ones, especially if you go to Southeast Asia.
If there's no other specific scientific topics, I think maybe we should do one of my favorite parts of the episode, which is the nitpick corner, which is where is a little thing that is like, that's not exactly, this is where we do the actually this, right?
Or how we would make things better.
We just give ourselves permission to nitpick, right? We don't actually expect the game to be perfectly accurate, but we just want to point out anything that's not quite like that actually would be in science. So obviously we already talked about trees don't grow in a year. I think everybody already knows that, but it's worth mentioning. Marielle, is there something that you had that you wanted to point out?
So I think what Dina would like me to point out is that the picture on the front of the box doesn't actually show a straw-colored fruit bat.
Oh no!
Oh?
What is it?
Well, I don't remember,
Okay.
but if you look at the straw-colored fruit bat, the head is much, it doesn't go gray.
It's more straw-colored.
Yeah, exactly. And especially they have this kind of like yellow strip of fur on the sides of their neck, which is where the name I think comes from. As I said, it's like I can show you the picture that I think inspired this to some degree because it's the same fruit.
Definitely wanna
but
see
I
that.
don't think it depicts the correct species.
Okay. That is a pretty big and legitimate nitpick, I think, to have the whole game be about straw-colored fruit bats and have the cover image not be a straw-colored fruit bat.
Yeah, Dina would know which one is shown there, but as I said, I'm a bit more iffy on my bats.
Okay. All right. Jason, did you have something you wanted to pick at?
The only one I can think of is that one end of game thing where it's like, okay, now time to slaughter all the wild animals and eat them for food because I get more points that way. That's the one thing.
Is there a way that you would penalize that? I guess you just need to make the wild animals worth more points or something.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
The only reason I did that is because they're worth a lot fewer points than goats, but they give you the same amount of food just about.
And mine actually isn't even in the game, but I'm going to pick anyway. It's in the accompanying booklet, the section about the benefits of fruit bats. When they go to the list, there's a thing. The list of bats' superpowers is long. They see with their ears, use ultrasound to orient themselves in the dark. That's true, but that's not these bats, right? There's also the comments about their cells slow down the aging process. So I think that maybe some bats, obviously, maybe live for long times or have cancer repairing genes. But again, it's like that's not wrong. It's just not specifically these fruit bats.
No, but bats are generally quite long-lived.
Okay, for their
More
size.
so than you would expect. So I think I once had in my hand a captive bat. That was one of the horseshoe bats. That lady was 20 years old, and that is not uncommon to see in bats.
That's a long time for an animal that's that size, right? I guess
Yeah.
do they break the heartbeat rule or that rule of thumb?
Well, what is an average heart rate? If you have a species that goes into torpor
Good point.
or hibernates,
Yeah.
that's hard to tell. But I think they do.
Okay.
That comes especially, I think, so what they do, like you would expect them to consume more energy. If we're not talking about echolocating bats, because echolocation is energetically costly, but what they do is they time it with their wing beats, and that makes it cheaper.
I never really thought about that being a cost to echolocate.
I mean, small bats, if you measure it right in front of their face, I think it's like 120 decibel. That's a loud scream.
So they're yelling so much they're burning calories.
Yes.
That's very cool. Okay, let's see. You used an idiom I wasn't familiar with, the rat tail.
Oh, sorry, that's like a German
Yeah,
thing.
I figured it was a German idiom. What does that mean?
It basically means like everything that's somehow attached to it. It's like the chain of consequences.
Okay. That's cool. I don't know if we have it.
And I couldn't remember what I wanted to say, so it was like it just came to me.
Hey, it's fine. No, this is the fun thing about having people from all over the world that get to talk to us, and we get to learn different idioms and stuff. Okay, so I think if that's our nitpick corner, why don't we move on to grading and then we can wrap up. This one's a little tricky. Let's start with science. Jason, why don't you go first?
So I am not a bat expert. So I'm going off the vibe I've gotten from talking with Marielle here and the other stuff. I'd say my metric is generally like how well is it getting across what it's trying to do. And the metric here is trying to show that if we cooperate with the fruit bats, then things work out better in the long term. That part seems solid. I would probably put it in maybe like the A- range. It seems pretty good. Probably a few things that could be a little bit better. You mentioned some of the stuff in the rule book where it's talking about the superpowers of like all bats as a unit as opposed to like this particular bat. But overall, I think it seems pretty good. And I mean, if this was done like without necessarily like consulting the scientists, it's just like, hey, this is a cool story. Let's do the research. Let's make this work. I mean, that may deserve some extra credit to bump up to A.
That's a good point. I mean, I guess we think that most of the people that are designing science games aren't necessarily communicating with scientists at the design stage, right?
Yes, but most of them are also working off of general level science as opposed to like this very specific research study that came out.
Okay. So let's see. In terms of the things here, I think that there is the reforestation capacity of the fruit bats. So that is being represented. There is I don't really know if it's specifically representing the ecological advantages of fruit bats in the sense of like, it doesn't really explain the gold mechanic. It does say that gold mining is bad. And I mean, I did find a study that the sort of local small scale gold mining is involved with a lot of removal of top vegetation because again, they're not going deep, they're going shallow. So you're cutting down way more vegetation, way more trees to do it. They are using mercury to extract the gold from the soil. And that, is presumably what we're talking about, the pollution. It is a damaging process. So I'd say those two things, the bat reforestation and the pollution associated with gold mining, I think it does a good job there. I don't see anything wrong with an A-. Like you've said before, Jason, like you say a lot, they're not trying to represent a lot of science here, but I think what they are trying to do, they're doing pretty well. And that whole thing about the echolocation, that's just a tiny little note in the accompanying booklet. And it's not even in the rule book, but it does. I wish more people knew that only some bats echolocate. That's all. Okay. So I'm fine with A-. What do you think, Marielle?
Okay. So disclaimer, I'm obviously not entirely unbiased in this regard.
We wouldn't expect you to be. I'm sure you have strong opinions.
So if I think back to how it was playing the game for the first time, as I said, it's like I haven't been involved in this game at all up until the time that they said it's like we have this game. To take this idea and make a game out of it, and not just make it into, as you said, like a small bad game, but like a well-designed game that takes this front and center. I think that's really cool. I also think it was really kind of how it emerges from using this kind of like bit of knowledge. It's like, hey, let's train families to make better use of bats than just bushmeat. I think that comes across really well when playing. It's something that is a fun way of playing the game. So I'm fine with that.
Okay. So what do you think? A minus then? Oh wait, no, we said we have a different grading scheme. What was it again?
Yes. So I work in Sweden, as I said, and there you grade students based on what they have. Like there's fail, there's pass, and there is like very good, like pass with distinction. And an I minus, I think, would fall for us with a pass with distinction.
So you think this is a pass with distinction?
Yeah. If we're kind of aligned on the general like science rating, then I think
okay. So. Well, I think we should definitely use your version of the grading. I mean, you are free to use whichever grading scale you find the most convenient. So we don't all have to use the same rubric necessarily. What about fun? I'm not kidding. I was thinking, oh my God, I am not going to enjoy this game. And I don't know how much that colored my perspective. I actually really like this game. It's fun. It's quick to play. Maybe like, I'm not the most tactical player, so I'm not super concerned about it, but it's enjoyable. It's a lot of fun to sort of like make all your little choices. And the other thing that surprised me is it really does play quick. I mean, it's a half an hour game and you're done. It takes longer to set up the game than it does to play the game, which I guess does happen sometimes. So am I going to pull it off the shelf and play it again? Absolutely I am. I think I've got a couple people I want to play it with in particular. We got some people coming in this weekend I think we might try to play with. So I'm giving that an A. That is my metric for how fun it is am I going to get it off the shelf and play it again? So it's an A. Or I'm sorry, a pass with distinction.
I'm definitely gonna give it a pass. I think I need to play it a few more times to see if it is pass with distinction or not, because the one time we played, like I got sort of a feel for it. I'd want to do some replaying on it. So
Jason, you beat me by 20 points. You sort of got a feel for it. I think you figured it out, man, but okay.
I just want to try it out a few more times where I could be playing the game and get into the groove of it other than just learning at the time. It's going to be somewhere in their A range, A minus. I don't know exactly where it would fall.
Okay.
It probably doesn't matter. It's like, would I play this again? Yes. That's probably the only thing that actually matters.
Okay, that's true. And Marielle, I know that you said you're not like a committed board game nerd, but you're there for it. So did you want to give it a fun grade too?
Yes. So I'm probably more in the camp, Brian, when it comes to how I play board games. More like for the fun rather than for
the
winning specifically. Yeah. And as I said, I am biased, but having played another couple games that kind of like go in this direction, for example, another one of Uwe Rosenberg's, which is Caverna, I think I like it for the fun and not necessarily for the competition. And here I think, compared to Caverna, for example, it's less, what happens less is kind of like frustrating the other players by your choices, just because there's so many different choices on the board, some of which kind of like lead into the same resources. So if you're less of a naughty player who likes to frustrate other people's strategies,
so again,
it's great
if
fun.
You're less like Jason, who likes to mess with people.
So for me, I enjoyed myself a lot. Okay. So I was actually surprised. I was also thinking like, oh, is this gonna be as good? But I liked it a lot, so I'll go along
with the pass.
Pass with distinction.
Pass with distinction. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, and it's like, is the little star because I'm biased? Maybe.
I think in this situation you can be forgiven for having some bias.
Also, can I just say wooden meeples? You get a bonus point for that.
Actually, I think the little wild animal meeples are some of my favorite meeples ever. Just these, like, I do love the idea of a generic animal, like nothing in particular. Of course, now I know it's actually this dukier, but
I think I know which species you're referring to. I would call it a duiker, but that's just because I'm Dutch and I kind of automatically do that when I see something that looks Dutch.
Yeah, you're probably right.
And I think the bat of the little meeple looks exactly like the photos that I have in my head from this particular species of antelope.
Okay, nice. All right. So I guess with that, we should maybe think about wrapping up the recording. Marielle, is there anywhere where you'd like anybody to be able to reach you? Do you use social media? I know it's not like professors aren't always amazing at that. I know neither are we, but sometimes we want to give people the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm not great with social media, also not a professor. But what I would like to share is maybe for when we published the study, we made which was mostly Dina and Teague while they were out in the field together with the film team, a video abstract. So if you want to have a little look more into what it looks like in that particular area, although that they made this in Kazanka National Park in Zambia, but if you want to see a straw-collared fruit bat and just how amazing it looks when you have hundreds of thousands of bats flying out from a roost, then you should look at
Oh
that.
my goodness. So we would love, I mean, try to stop us. Just show us the link. No, we will definitely share that. Man, I might need to try to figure out if because we do little videos that we put out for these episodes. I put them on like TikTok and stuff like that. Maybe I want to like edit in just the tiniest little clip of that. That would be fun. I might try. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, okay. Well, I'm really glad that you're able to find time to join us and talk about this, unique game and this sort of unique link between a scientific study and a game. I guess with that, we're going to wrap it up here. So I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. So until next time, have a great month and great games. And as always,
have fun playing dice with the universe. See ya.
This has been the Gaming with Science podcast, copyright 2025. Listeners are free to reuse this recording for any non-commercial purpose, as long as credit is given to Gaming with Science. This podcast is produced with support from the University of Georgia. All opinions are those of the hosts and do not imply endorsement by the sponsors. If you wish to purchase any of the games that we've talked about, we encourage you to do so through your friendly local game store. Thank you, and have fun playing dice with the universe.